Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inclusive Managers Onboarding. We are going to spend just a little bit of time today talking about how to do onboarding in ways that really promote your values of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And as we get started, I'd like to invite you to mute your microphones so that we don't have any background noise, and we will get started in just a moment. Okay, so welcome to the Inclusive Onboarding webinar. I am Deetta Jones, and I look forward to spending the next few minutes with you on this short weekly webinar that's part of a special series associated with the Inclusive Managers Learning Series. Let me tell you just a little bit about the Inclusive Managers Learning Series. First of all, Deetta Jones and Associates is a minority and women-owned business founded in 2005 by myself, Deetta Jones. We specialize in management consulting, training services, and equity, diversity, and inclusion services. We have clients that range across a wide variety of industries. A lot of our work traditionally has been with libraries and in higher education, but we also have all sorts of relationships in healthcare and advertising, other not-for-profits, in the financial services industries. And so really excited to be able to continuously kind of expand the array of industries that we work with and continue to have really robust offerings to share with you. A little bit about myself. I have been working in the fields of interculturalism and diversity and inclusion strategy, and also leadership, management, organizational development work for almost 25 years professionally. I've been studying and contributing to interculturalism for about 30 years. Much of my work has been as a consultant, where I've worked external to clients and side by side with clients on helping to design and lead leadership programs, giving speeches, and working as an organizational development consultant with industries and organizations around the world. I design and facilitate workshops and have been doing that for many years. And more recently, I've been spending quite a lot of my time designing and facilitating virtual programs, as well as continuing with our consulting services. I've worked across the world, and so I'm really thankful for being able to bring a perspective that is informed by pretty diverse travels and pretty diverse opportunities in working with a variety of different cultural experiences. Today's webinar is going to focus us on the topic of inclusive onboarding. And this webinar is just a snippet of a series that we have been offering and that we will continue to offer over the next 5 weeks, that really gives people who are interested a sneak peek at some of the content that we offer in the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, which is our virtual program. The thing that we find really kind of frequently asked is, how is it that we can do some of the work that we traditionally and already do in our organizations, but with an EDI lens, really thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion values and bringing those to the work that we already do. And so this webinar is really meant to help you think about how it is that you can take values and probably practices that you already have in place, and then really bring equity, diversity, and inclusion lenses and values to those current practices to make sure that the work that you do demonstrates your equity, diversity, and inclusion values, but also that EDI work doesn't get sidelined or pigeonholed as something that we need to do in addition to our normal work, or as separate from the things that are part of your core operating practices. So what we'll cover today is What is the difference between orientation and onboarding? It is quite often that I have conversations with people and I'll use the word onboarding and they'll then follow up with the word orientation. And it becomes clear to me that people oftentimes confuse the two. So I want to make sure that we just have a little bit of description between what those are. Some of the benefits of a strong onboarding program and or approach. Some of the specific things that are important as far as inclusive onboarding that are in addition to your kind of what may be typical or already in place onboarding practices, but things that you could easily add or amend at any level from any role in your organization. And then ending on what is the specific role of the manager? And in this, I mean manager as in any person on this call, even if you're not a formal executive, even if you don't have a formal managerial title, when is the opportunity for you to have a positive impact on onboarding practices in your organization? So orientation versus onboarding. Orientation is something that for the most part, most if not all organizations do. Every organization that I've been in does it slightly differently, but for most organizations, orientation happens one time. It's something that typically happens at the beginning of a person's tenure with an organization. So within the first day or the first week of a person getting hired into a new position or a new role, it typically happens right at the beginning of a person's tenure with an organization. And the purposes, in addition to helping a person feel welcome in that organization, are also to just really practically share, like, what are the nuts and bolts that you need to know associated with this job, right? So what are the contractual sorts of things that you have as far as obligations to your employer? What are the sorts of things that you have related to healthcare? What are some of the HR policies? What about things like sick leave? But also, what is the organization chart and where do you fit into that organization chart? Clarifying and concretizing your position description. And also some of the tools that you might need in order to actually do your work, whether that means having access to shared folders or shared files, access to certain software, being provided particular equipment, right? So orientation typically covers a lot of things. It might describe things about the larger or the parent organization that are important for people to understand as far as the relationship between their unit or department and the parent institution. But those sorts of things that are typically pretty kind of nuts and bolts and essential to get a person started in a job. Onboarding, on the other hand, should last for significantly longer than orientation. Now, everybody will have different practices around onboarding. My preference is that onboarding should be 9 to 12 months. I don't mean that a person should not be working and productive for 9 to 12 months. But that onboarding as a structured process for helping a person get not just settled in the organization, but to a place where they are performing at a high level of proficiency, and also where they are able to really feel like they've acculturated into the organizational culture and structure and practices, takes 9 to 12 months in my experience. The other thing about onboarding is that it typically has a lot of people involved over this period of time. So orientation might have a lot of people involved, as in it may be that at the beginning of your tenure, there are people representing many different units or departments who may be part of an orientation experience. But onboarding, sometimes people assume that onboarding is relegated specifically to the HR function or to the manager. I do not agree with that. I actually think that onboarding is a structured approach that should have at least multiple people involved over time. So there could be and should be somebody from HR who plays a role or a set of roles. The hiring manager should play some role as well, in a very sophisticated role. And then I also really support the idea of having an onboarding partner or some kind of a mentor in place, somebody who explicitly understands their role associated with this 9 to 12 month process. The purposes of onboarding, which include orientation. So an onboarding process and approach, in my opinion, includes orientation, is really to help a new person in an organization learn about their job in the context of that organization, and also to learn about the culture of the organization. it's very hard to understand the culture of an organization within the first 24 hours or week of a position, regardless of how many people you talk to in an interview process, regardless of how much research you do, regardless of how many ways in which you look at an org chart. It's really hard to understand kind of how things work around here in ways that are sophisticated and that will allow you to be able to ask and have answered the questions that only are associated with experience within a specific context and culture. And so onboarding is really about giving a person an opportunity to acculturate over time. I'm just going to foreshadow a little bit and just kind of pull back the curtain back to the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, which is our virtual program. In the section of the Inclusive Managers Toolkit that talks about onboarding, we go on to describe kind of models for acculturating into an organization that are really helpful for thinking about some of the things that a person might need at different stages of this 9 to 12 month process, and also some of the interventions, the proactive ways in which the organization can prepare for people going through a transition in order to minimize some of the difficulties that are often anticipated and experienced related to onboarding, as well as to make sure that there are things that are repeatable and scalable in place, because this is, of course, going to be an experience that you have over and over again as you bring on new hires. To go on and talk a little bit more about onboarding and orientation, I'll go on and talk a little bit about here some of the benefits of strong onboarding. The benefits of strong onboarding is that it allows you to create a structured and a repeatable process. Structured and repeatable is incredibly important for those of you who often have days like me, or weeks or years like me. We're just busy, right? And with all of my best intentions, I don't carve out the time that I want to carve out and that I intend to carve out and that I value carving out in order to have the kinds of conversations or the kind of thought and preparedness that will allow me to really go into a new relationship as effectively as possible. I may not be thinking about all of the things that a person who may be coming from a very different lived experience might need from myself. I may not be remembering some of the questions that I had when I started as a new person in this particular organization. That would be incredibly helpful for me to be able to convey to a new person. A structured and repeatable process allows us the space to collect those really important ideas, put together a process with a structured timeline and approach, roles and responsibilities, my own and others, that allows me to make sure that I'm bringing my A game to this new relationship and really making sure that we are being as thoughtful and intentional as possible as we bring new folks on, and also that we are engaging other people in this process of welcoming new folks into our organization. The second bullet here is that a structured and solid onboarding program really supports evenness across the experience of new hires. This one is incredibly important, and I use the word evenness often when I talk about organizations, particularly organizational culture, and specifically when I talk about some of the opportunities for strengthening our managerial capacity. Evenness is so important because it allows people to feel like they're being treated equitably and fairly. People aren't looking across the organization and saying, well, how come that person has a mentor? Or, well, how come that person has weekly meetings with their supervisor? Well, how come that person was able to sit in on that meeting or shadow so-and-so, right? Evenness diminishes some of those experiences that often create a sense of unfairness or inequity that people feel when they look across the organization and say, everyone else or other people had a significantly different experience than I did here, right? And so having a structured process allows us to be able to, even if everybody brings their own kind of flavor to how it is that we interact with new people, we at least remember that there are very specific things that we as an organization want to make sure that we are introducing people to, that we are inviting people to be part of, that we're creating opportunities for multi-directional communication and feedback and solicitation of ideas, and that we're not kind of at the last minute thinking of ways in which we want to engage people or information that would have been helpful to share with them at an earlier stage in their experience with us. So this evenness is a really, really wonderful opportunity for conveying fairness and equity across experiences of new hires. The third bullet ensures opportunities for multi-directional and multi-layered learning. And so a strong onboarding program, because it lasts for 9 to 12 months, there are opportunities along the way for planting, in addition to any other regularly scheduled meetings with managers or with HR or with mentors, opportunities for also asking about how's it going as far as learning about the culture? What are some of the things that I or that we might help you understand about how things work around here? Again, a cultural kinds of question that could help you to be more successful, or that could help us to learn about you in ways that would allow us to customize our approach with you as far as the things that we do as a manager. For example, it's incredibly helpful for you as a manager to have a sense of how your new employee is motivated. But to just ask that question on the first day, they may have an answer for you. But of course, that answer is going to have much more dimension and nuance. It's going to be much more culturally informed. And I mean organizationally, from an organizational culture point of view. Informed if a person was asked the same kind of question after 3 months or 5 months or 7 months in their position. And so really thinking about and maximizing the opportunity for kind of multi-directional and multi-layered learning that allows you as managers or as HR leaders or as organizational development professionals or as mentors to be able to customize your approach and also to give that space to the new hire as well. And then finally, and I alluded to this in the last point, is that it creates feedback loops, right? And feedback loops are those really small, very regularly scheduled opportunities for having information that allows us, for soliciting information that allows us to be able to make adjustments along the way, right-sized adjustments and right-timed adjustments so that we can maximize the experience of both the new hire and also the return on investment of the employer. So as we think about kind of some of the benefits of strong onboarding, these are benefits that, you know, most of us, especially those of us who already have onboarding practices, kind of know about already, whether or not we practice these things evenly in our organization. These are pretty obvious kinds of benefits, but they're really important because they have a positive impact, not just on the new hire, but also on the capacity of the organization. It takes off the demand to kind of be thinking while we're also constantly putting out fires about what it is that we can do to welcome and help make sure that this new person is acculturated as appropriately and as intentionally as possible. It takes some of that demand off of us because we've thought about that and we've prepared ourselves in advance. But it also serves us in many ways when it comes to recruitment and retention. So most people I talk to, not just around equity, diversity, and inclusion, but particularly around equity, diversity, and inclusion, really want to figure out how do we do recruitment better, and also how do we make sure that our recruitment efforts aren't always balanced out by retention. We might hire some really wonderful folks, but then we lose them to retention issues very quickly. How do we deal with that? My advice is that a really solid onboarding program is one really wonderful intervention, not just for retention, but also for engagement and for recruitment, right? That a lot of times we think about engagement and retention as something that, you know, kind of stands alone from recruitment, but a person's experience in our organization has a positive or a negative impact on our ability to recruit, right? People talk to each other. Our organization develops a relationship and a reputation with individuals and with communities, where if a person or people representing certain communities, or people who have a lot of influence in certain communities, or people who have broad networks in different communities, start to have experiences that aren't as welcome or thoughtful or inclusive or equitable as they expect them to be, as we espouse that they will be if they come work for us during the hiring process, then they share that information with their colleagues. They may not be blasting us on social media, but if a colleague says, hey, I'm kind of interested in exploring a position at such and such institution, I know you used to work there, can you tell me a little bit about it? Right? It is altogether possible and quite probable that that person is going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And so if we have more good that's thoughtful and where our values are demonstrated in action and equitably and evenly across our organization, then that really helps position people who have had experience in our organization, current or past, to be able to tell really positive stories about what we have in place and about how our commitments and values show up practically and demonstrably. It's really important to think about, if you want to tackle the issue of recruitment, also look at ways in which we bring people into our organization and make sure that we have high levels of high quality engagement while the people are in our organizations. And using structured approaches to processes like onboarding is one really, really important opportunity. So with that said, let's also talk a little bit about inclusive onboarding specifically. So I talked some about onboarding and I talked about recruitment and retention, and that's incredibly important. And those things are things that hopefully are pretty self-explanatory. But we also want to think about the act of inclusive onboarding specifically. So regardless of what your organization's onboarding practices are, you probably have some typical ways in which you either orient and or bring on new people into your organization, even if you don't have a formal onboarding program. If you do have a formal onboarding program, I invite you to take a look at whatever that formal onboarding program or approach or practices are, and then just think about how it is that you might, like outlined here in this first bullet, bring EDI lenses to your practice. And so an equity, diversity, inclusion lens is really thinking about, in what ways are we making sure that as we are bringing a new person into the organization, we're also taking into consideration the fact that this person might come from very different lived experiences than is the kind of traditional person we hire in this particular organization, or is the vast majority of people who currently work here, or maybe coming from a very different professional background, and so is going to require maybe different ways in which we acculturate them. So things like not using acronyms in every sentence that are institution or industry specific, so that we're making sure that a person has full access to the language and the conversation as early on as possible, right? Things that also might really allow us to even look at some of our own practices with maybe a more critical eye. Maybe we look at a person's seating arrangement. Maybe we look at their desk station and think about, is this accessible, right? Is a person who has mobility limitations going to be able to work in this space, right? In what ways are we thinking about things like ergonomics? What about restrooms? Do we have all gender restrooms? If so, how do we call those out? Where are they located, right? How are we making sure that we are taking as broad a possible perspective on the fact that there are and will continue to be people who come from many different lived experiences and represent many different identities who we are welcoming into our organization. And we want to make sure that our language and our practices and our processes reflect those values of diversity, inclusion, and equity, but also so that any one of us, regardless of whether we're the hiring manager or the HR manager or the mentor, have the same kind of language available to us to make sure that we're pointing out options and nuances in ways in which our values can be demonstrated, right? So that it's not just beholden to the couple of people who feel most comfortable talking with a person who may come from the same cultural background about how to navigate, the bathroom scene, when really it would be much more appropriate for us to have a policy and a practice that talks about our bathrooms, right? And how it is that people who might need a different restroom can ask for that or find that. Who do they talk to? Where are all gender bathrooms, for example? We need to be able to have proactive language that describes to people what we have available that really demonstrates our values of inclusion and equity. And then we also, the other benefit is that a really inclusive practice of onboarding involves many stakeholders, that all of us have responsibility. This is one of the things that people wrestle with, probably more than anything related to diversity and inclusion. It's the how, right? How do I do it? Like, I care about it. I care about diversity. I care about creating an inclusive environment. I care about people feeling welcome here. I just don't know what I'm supposed to do. Right? And so having an intentional and inclusive onboarding approach and practice is helpful because it equips every single person who has some role or responsibility, including teammates, to be able to think about ways in which we can prepare for and engage thoughtfully and meaningfully with this new person over the course of their first 9 to 12 months in ways that really encourage not just the continued conveyance of the welcoming environment, but also their productivity, their high levels of ability to understand how things work around here, and also decrease the kind of learning curve that's associated with moving into a new environment, which increases their productivity faster because they're spending less time trying to figure out how things work around here and more time actually performing. So the manager's role. As a manager, your job is really to help new people and people who are currently there be as successful as possible in their work and in the organization. And so to think about how it is that you can be effective with helping to support onboarding, this is a wonderful opportunity to talk to your HR team and ask, what are our onboarding practices? What processes do we have in place? And where is it that we can have maybe conversations where we think about how our values of equity, diversity, and inclusion show up in our practices that I can be equipped with and other colleague managers have access to. I invite you to consider what you can do in advance to reach out to new hires. Now, it depends on what the kind of role is or what the policies and procedures are. But there are things that you can do, like having an email, waiting that it's going to be sent, that is the delayed send that's going to be sent on the person's first day, so that it's right there and pops up in their inbox, welcoming them the first day. Or where you can talk to other members of your team in advance and think about ways in which we might have a show of welcome. Maybe put a small potted plant on the person's desk that comes from the team, just to show how we are excited to have you here. I encourage you to also think about, as managers, using structured processes, and I put in parentheses here, over time, very intentionally. Don't just come out of the gate, with all your energy, but think about over time how it is that you can continue to use structured processes to ensure that there's opportunities for ongoing learning that happens in both directions, and that there's opportunities for feedback and conversation and learning. Ask questions. Ask questions of your HR team. Ask questions of the other members of the team that you manage, to try to figure out what were some of the things that were helpful as you were coming new into this position. Right? What were some of the things that your HR managers want to make sure that we know as managers our responsibility are, as far as policies or expectations or performance reviews? Ask questions of the new hire. What are some of the things that they have questions about now, or things that they can imagine having questions about in the future that we might want to plant on a future agenda? Solicit feedback. And solicit feedback is where you are intentionally asking for feedback, not just of the new hire, especially as this person is getting started. It may be a bit intimidating for them to give you feedback early on. It's wonderful to set a tone that you are open to receiving feedback as well as giving feedback as part of your relationship. But also, I invite you to think about soliciting feedback with other members of your team, people who are already there, that will allow you to think about how it is that you acclimated them, how you help them onboard into their role, that could help you learn from some of those previous experiences. right? And so think about how it is that you could solicit feedback in your role as managers in ways that allow you to make adjustments, behavioral adjustments as necessary, or repeat things that were particularly successful or effective. The second to last bullet says show up with intention. This one is super obvious, but I say it all the time. Just be there. Just let your intentions show. Let your honorable intentions show. I know that we live in a world that is super fast paced and where a lot of us are very distracted, and we often have, our heads down looking at our phone while we're also talking. And I really want to convey my warmth and I'm excited that you're here, but I have so many other things going on. Show your intentions. Put aside what is that burning fire that will still be burning when you're done welcoming your new person, and just be there with the person and convey your authentic intentions as warmly as possible. It's so important for people to just have that human to human emotional connection, emotionally intelligent connection as early as possible, right? Doesn't have to be super warm and fuzzy. I don't mean that, but genuine and authentic and undistracted. And then the very last bullet is learn, adjust, repeat. Continuously think about things that you can and are learning. As managers, as leaders, that's one of the most important jobs that we have, and that is to constantly be learning about ourselves, about others, and then making appropriate adjustments, incorporating more of the things that are working well and that are consistent with our own values, and then letting go of things that maybe aren't working as well, and then continuously doing that forever and ever and ever. So don't be hard on yourself if everything isn't perfect first time out, but just know that giving up is not an option. Just hang in there. And so the last thing that I want to share with you is that we have an inclusive onboarding checklist that we would like to share with you as a gift. This is one of the tools, of the many tools that are included in the Inclusive Managers Toolkit. And it gives you an example of things that would be helpful for you to think about. And it breaks it down over the course of that 9 to 12 month window that I described. And so just like this first page where it has all of these very specific little check boxes, opportunities for check marks, it goes all the way through 12 months. And so in the first phase, in the second phase, in the third phase, and all the ways in which you might think about not just kind of the nuts and bolts of getting started, but also building in feedback loops, who else you might want to engage, how you might want to engage that person, and also making sure that you're having helpful questions about learning and navigating the organizational culture, as well as opportunities for helping to manage performance expectations that are going to absolutely be front and center with your new hire. So encourage you to download this. For those of you who don't already have a copy, one wasn't already sent to you when you registered for this webinar. You will have one sent to you immediately following this webinar. And then we also have posted it in the chat window for you. So that is your copy, and I hope that you find it useful. The last thing is to let you know that this webinar series continues, especially for the next 5 weeks. We're going to continue to have these short weekly webinars just to give you a little bit of information and a little bit of perspective on what we offer in the Inclusive Managers Toolkit. We are in enrollment phase right now for our February 17 Spring 2020 launch. And we would love for all of you to participate and invite your colleagues and invite your teams to participate with us. But we want to make sure that you have enough information in order to figure out if this is the right fit for you. But we would absolutely love to have you there. So we did inclusive onboarding today. Following that, we're going to have a session next week on the 23rd on leading change and focusing on the how of leading change. On January 30th, we're going to talk about moving from kind of programmatic approaches to equity, diversity, and inclusion to really sustainable equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy. February 6th is successful equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy and 5 traps to avoid. There are a lot of people doing equity, diversity, and inclusion, and there's a lot of expectation that it be done. But there are also some things that you do not want to do. And we're going to outline what those are and also give you some more helpful alternatives. And then on February 10th, we will have a session on the 4 building blocks of engagement and retention. So that those of you who are managers, leaders, mentors, executives, HR officers, regardless of what your role is, you can think about what it is that you can put in place and or contribute to in your organization that supports engagement and retention. Again, the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, you can visit us at our website at www.deettajones.com to learn more about this 10-week program. It launches on February 17th. We would absolutely love to have you there. So if you'd like to enroll, absolutely let us know. You can just email us at info@deettajones.com. Or you can follow the link on our website, www.deettajones.com, to enroll or to figure out how to get in touch with us specifically. And then finally, what we have here is just a schedule so that you can get a sense of how the 10 weeks are scheduled. So we have the Inclusive Managers Toolkit is broken into 3 different segments: you as manager, managing others, and then organization-wide impact. And what you'll see is that each week is jam-packed with content and tools. Every week also has many, many tools. We probably have 60 tools that are like the Inclusive Managers onboarding checklist that we just are sharing with you, that are very practical, very approachable, and immediately actionable. So regardless of what your specific interest is or your immediate need is, we want to equip you with tools that will help you now and all the way through your managerial experience. And this is not just for people who have formal manager in their title, but for anyone who's managing anything: coordinators, project managers, facilitators, HR people, organizational development specialists, diversity officers, executives, faculty members. You are all invited, and our experience is that all of you will have something that you are able to bring away from this. In addition to the content, we also have weekly coaching sessions, two a week, live coaching sessions with our faculty, as well as webinars, live webinars, so that we can go deeper into the content, and also so that we can have access to each other in a live, engaged conversation that's available every week. Once you enroll in the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, you will always be a member. So every single time we offer another session of the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, you will always be invited to opt in and to participate and to have access to any updates, any new material, and to experience the entire thing again if you'd like. So it really is the gift that keeps on giving. And with that said, I want to thank all of you for being here today in this webinar and taking time to learn a little bit more about inclusive onboarding. Just to give us a couple of minutes at the end of this, are there any comments or questions that you'd like to post in the chat window? And we can handle those right now. If anyone has comments, questions at all, we'd love to hear from you. All right, my friends, I hope that you found this helpful. Enjoy the inclusive onboarding checklist, and I look forward to spending time again with you next week. Have a great weekend.